Tempe Domine et miserere.
Hello, this is Arturo Ortiz from Restoring Christ. Today I'm going to be particularly talking about an article that just appeared yesterday in LifeNews, which is a prestigious pro-life news organization and news outlet that touches upon global issues regarding the sanctity of life and pro-life issues. So the article that I'm going to be talking about today, right now, it's an article titled "UN refuses to send coronavirus funds to Ecuador, which is a pro-life nation, unless it legalizes abortions." So some excerpts from the article. It's that the United Nations is using coronavirus aid to pressure Ecuador to legalize the killing of unborn babies and abortions, pro-life leaders in the country said this month. The article goes on to say that the Catholic news agency reports the country's Minister of Foreign Relations and Human Mobility recently asked for 46.4 million in aid from the UN humanitarian response plan in regard to COVID-19. The citizen petition says that in the face of the COVID-19 drama, the United Nations has offered to send humanitarian aid to Ecuador, but with the contingency that the aid is not free, since in various sections of the document it is explained that said aid is conditional on Ecuador legalizing abortion. The article furthermore goes on to say, and it seems it has already begun to produce results because Ecuador is one of the 59 countries that in the midst of the pandemic has already committed to promote abortion. The petition adds, referring to a 6 joint declaration signed by a number of countries, including Ecuador, to protect sexual and reproductive health and rights and to promote gender responsiveness during the pandemic. The article finishes by saying that Guayaquil Family Network and other pro-life organizations recently began a petition urging President Lenin Moreno to reject abortion agenda with the aid, according to the report. It goes against the Constitution, specifically Article 45, which guarantees the right to life from conception, a right that was ratified last year, September 17, 2019, at the plenary session of the National Assembly, Villa Fuerte said. So the reason I highlight this article is specifically given the fact that Ecuador, like many Latin American countries, are very Catholic. They have a very Catholic culture with safety measures defending the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death. And we can clearly see this in the case of Ecuador, particularly since, as the article mentions, just last year, it was that Ecuador started adding even more strenuous defenses of the dignity of human life, particularly preventing, abortion. So the question is the UN really seeking the good benefit of the people of Ecuador and particularly of other countries due to religious-based and personal conscience issues by refusing to implement or by reason of the UN's refusal to give foreign financial aid to such countries because those countries refuse to implement such devices like abortion, contraception, sterilization, and other devices. Many rightfully complain about the role of imperialism, in history and in contemporary politics as a means of enforcing other countries' behavior. This is nevertheless imperialism at its worst, and is why I am generally not a fan of giving foreign aid to other countries. And one of the main reasons I'm not a fan of many non-governmental agencies, NGOs, particularly because of these types of contingencies that they often place in giving financial aid, particularly contingencies to implement behavior and actions contrary to the dignity of the human person, contrary to the natural law and the divine moral laws of God. Now, it should be said that this is nothing new for the UN, the World Bank, nor a lot of philanthropists in general, or presidencies and governmental bodies. Robert Zubrin uh, states in his book, The Merchants of Despair, that since the mid 1960s, quote, the United States government, amongst many other world nations, has served as the leading funder of global empire of population control and slaughterhouses. Of the billions of dollars expended on such work, a portion has been directly spent by the U.S. agency, amongst many other nations, for international development, such as U.S. aid on its own field activities. But the majority of the taxpayer cash has been laundered through either the UN Fund for Population Activities, UNFPA, the World Bank, various foreign governments, or a host of private non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and foundations, notably led by the International Planned Parenthood Federation, IPPF, and the population control. That's one of the main reasons that I strongly support the use of the Mexico City policy that was first initiated by Ronald Reagan, was carried on by George W. Bush, and re-implemented by our current president, particularly because the purpose of the Mexico City policy is to ensure that when foreign aid is given to other nations, it particularly prevents other nations from using that money for any related activity that has to do with abortion and other various population control mechanisms that lead to the direct killing or the direct life preventative aspects in regard to reproductive issues. Many individuals remember years ago when Melinda Gates, along with Bill Gates and the Bill Gates Foundation, particularly sought to fundraise billions of dollars and give it to third world nations such as Africa, with the contingency that those nations would force the use of contraception amongst various other family and population control mechanisms. There's a letter to Melinda Gates that a woman from Africa wrote. I believe she was from Nigeria, if I'm not mistaken. I know she states in her letter that she was from a small town in Africa. Nevertheless, this is a very beautiful letter that she wrote. I'm going to quote sections of it, portions, and comment on it furthermore, and I will link all of these articles that are mentioned in the video in the description below, but particularly some of the portions from this beautiful letter of this African woman to Melinda Gates is beautiful, and I'm going to quote it. Quote, growing up in a remote town in Africa, I have always known that a new life is welcomed with much mirth and joy. In fact, we have a special clarion call or song in our village reserved for births, and another special one for marriages. All I can say with certainty is that we as a society love and welcome babies, even with substandard medical care in most places, which is an aspect of third world nations. Nevertheless, women are valiant in pregnancy, and once the baby arrives, they gracefully and heroically rise into maternal mode. So stopping right here for a quick moment, this African woman is particularly showing that the African culture greatly values the sanctity of human life, and particularly this is the reason why this African woman, amongst many other Africans in general, were opposed to receiving any type of philanthropic money from Melinda Gates that had such contingencies attached to it regarding the use of contraception. She goes on to say, amidst all our African afflictions and difficulties, amidst all the social, economic, and political instabilities, our babies are always a firm symbol of hope, a promise of life, a reason to strive for the legacy of a bright future. The letter goes on to state, upon reading about Melinda Gates' plan to collect almost 5 billion in order to ensure that the African woman is less fertile, less encumbered, and yes, she says more quote unquote liberated. With her incredible wealth, she wants to replace the legacy of an African woman, which is her child, with the legacy of child-free sex. Unlike what we see in the developed world, in the Western world, there is actually very high compliance in Africa with Pope Paul VI's Humanae Vitae, which is his encyclical on the sanctity of human life. Funny how people with a much lower literacy level could clearly understand that which the average Vogue and Cosmo reading high-class woman has refused to understand. I guess humility makes all the difference. With most African women faithfully practicing and adhering to a faith, mainly Christian, or in some cases Muslim, there is a high regard for sex in society, especially among the women. Sex is sacred and private. The moment these huge amounts of contraceptives, drugs, and devices are injected into the roots of our society, they will undoubtedly start to erode and poison the moral sexual ethics that have been woven into our society DNA by our faith, not unlike the revolution that befell the Western world after the 1930s Lambeth Conference, which was an Anglican conference which had been the one that doctrinally approved of contraception. Even at a glance, the letter goes on to state anyone could see that the unlimited and easy availability of contraceptions in Africa would surely increase infidelity and sexual promiscuity, as sex is presented by this multi-billion-dollar project as a casual pleasure sport that can indeed come with no strings or babies attached. Think of the exponential spread of HIV and other STDs as men and women with abundant access to contraceptives take up multiple concurrent sex partners. So before finishing this letter, I will comment in this section and state that what this African lady is getting at is particularly that when we implement various types of population control mechanisms or family control mechanisms, particularly the use of things like abortion, contraception, and things of that nature, it actually increases sexual promiscuity and actually leads to further health problems. The letter finishes by this African lady actually suggesting alternatives to this type of philanthropic endeavor. She recommends, for example, food programs for younger children, pediatric care, good healthcare systems, chastity programs, support for micro-business opportunities for women, a fortification of already established NGOs that are aimed at protecting women from sex trafficking, prostitution, forced marriage, child labor, domestic violence, sex crimes, and various other mechanisms. She particularly states that these various things particularly can be implemented without any type of contingency attached that would lead to a contradiction of natural law and the divine moral laws of God. So I hope that this video helps you understand the problematic aspects of such contingency programs attached to foreign aid. I'm not particularly arguing that we should never give foreign aid, nor am I arguing that we should completely do away with the concept of NGOs, particularly such as the United Nations or the World Bank, or that these types of concepts in theory are not good. But what I am arguing is that there ought to be greater restrictions and regulations, particularly ensuring that such NGOs, such as the UN and the World Bank, do not allow for programs and initiatives that outright and particularly contradict the natural law or the divine moral laws of God. So hopefully our world leaders take this into consideration. Hopefully the leaders of NGOs take this into consideration. And I hope that this video helps you as an individual understand the sacredness of human life and the problematic aspects of these various foreign aid programs, at least as they currently exist.
Attende Domine et miserere